Hello everybody, welcome back to Life of an NQT, or welcome if it's the first time. Sorry for the slight delay this week. Thank you very much for those of you that are joining us already on via Twitter. Good to see you again. Welcome back. This evening we are going to be doing a Wednesday night webinar all about the teaching standards and reflecting on year, or your skit year as well. Originally it was just going to be for the NQT year, but we've gone for the training way as well. Now, as always, if we have any issues with the technical at the beginning, it's really useful if you can let me know. Either let me know on Twitter. I'm watching the hashtag Wednesday night webinar this week, so if you want to use anything on that one, that will come up on the screen. Or of course, if you're on the live chat on Twitter as well, if you can't see me or hear me, or if it's not quite working, then please do let me know. That would be really, really useful. We'll get underway in a couple of minutes. I want to start by just introducing myself again. If you didn't see last week's one, it was the first webinar that I've done, something a little bit different. My name is James. This is Life of an NQT, which was something that started back in 2013. When I started doing this, something very new, something very different for me. I have been a primary school teacher for 7 years now. We might be having some issues with the connection, which will be a little bit of pain. We shall see. We might be having some issues with the connection, so if I do dip out, I apologise. I will keep going, and hopefully things will be nice and stable. So talking about myself still, so primary school teacher for 7 years now. I've been a mentor for trainee teachers. I've worked with NQTs. I'm also a member of SLT now. I've been a head of year for 4 years, head of year 4 at the moment, which is a great job. I'm a staff governor, a subject leader of a few different subjects. I've had English, geography, science and computing, so quite a lot of range across that. And I've done some lectures as well, as I've said, for NQTs at Kingston University, which is where I graduated from back in 2013. The whole idea of Life of an NQT is that back then in 2013, when I gave my evaluation in at the end of the academic year, I said that there weren't enough NQTs or people that were in the classroom giving us ideas and inspiration. And so my university lecturer turned around to me and said, well, you do it then. And that's basically what I've done. So I started with the Twitter feed in 2013. We've had the blog, we have had various different things going on, and now we've moved into webinars as well. So this is the second webinar of this series. I'm doing 5 of them between now and mid-May. If things go well, then I'm going to do another series taking from the beginning of June through, including some Zoom webinars as well. So if that's something you're interested in, then make sure that you do get in touch and get involved with that one. So the idea is to have a look at the world of evidencing your training year or your NQT year. Okay, both of them are similarly important. There's a focus on the teaching standards tonight, so we're going to go through all 8 of those, and we're going to have a brief look at what each one of them means. We're going to talk about what the government say it means, and I'm going to give you a bit of an inside view on what I think it means and what I've reflected on it to mean over the years. We're going to look at how you can evidence those teaching standards. I know that for skit students, you're looking at learning journeys at the moment, and I know that for many NQTs, you're looking at your end of year reflection files. And I'm going to give you the chance to think about your strengths and area to improve as well. I want to talk about reflection, because reflection actually is a really key part of what it is we do as teachers, and I didn't realise this to begin with. So if I can fast track your thinking on that one and give you a bit of awareness on that, then hopefully that means that we're doing something good today. Now, a couple of things before we fully start. If you do want to get involved and interactive this evening, then please do so. I love that part. Otherwise, it's me sitting here in my office talking for 50 minutes. If you want to get involved on Twitter, hashtag Wednesday night webinar is what you need. If you are a Google user, or you've got a YouTube account, you can live chat. I've got that up in front of me as well. But yeah, get involved with all those ways if you've got any questions. Also, a good thing to have is a pad and paper. So if you haven't got one of those, grab something very quickly around you, or open up a Word tab on your internet. I will try and put some notes out at the end of the webinar this week. I will upload it to my blog as well, which is lifeofannqtandbeyond.wordpress.com. If you go onto there, I will have the video for you, but also any notes that I go on for. Cool, right, well, let's kick off then. Thinking about reflection. Before we go on to the teaching standards, I just wanted to talk about that briefly. I've been thinking a lot this week about the whole idea of a reflective practitioner, and it made me laugh because when I was at university, my ped and prof lecturer, or I won't name her, always used to say to me that being a reflective practitioner was a really big thing. It was the buzzword for the whole 3 years that I was at university, so much so they made us buy a textbook called that. And I didn't really see the point of it. if I'm honest. And I knew that reflection was important and that you've got to reflect on all areas of life. But I didn't quite get it as a trainee teacher, and I didn't quite get it as an NQT. To me, I knew that I had to develop what I was doing. I knew that I had to learn what I was doing. I didn't really think about the importance of thinking how I was doing it, how well I was doing it, and what I could do to improve. So thinking about it this week, I have used a couple of texts, and I've got them on the table next to me, and I'll just mention them. Two particular books that are good, which Sage Education both publish and sell, and they gave them to me a couple of years ago for free to review, actually. Julia Lawrence's chapter in NQT, The Beginner's Guide to Outstanding Practice. That's by Jolliffe and Warren. Very, very good book. Really interesting. I think the NQT book gives you a little bit more insight to it, and just really strips back what reflection should be used for and why it's useful. But also Thompson and Wollstonecraft's The Teacher Trainee Handbook. There's a nice chapter in there as well about reflection, the ins and outs, and why it's important. So if you haven't got those key texts, or you've never seen them, have a look for them. I think they're probably a mirror image on the YouTube video, which is a bit of a pain. But yeah, they look like that, both of them, the NQT book and the Trainee Teacher Handbook. Both of those, I put a photo on my Twitter feed the other day, actually. So if you're at Life of an NQT on Twitter, have a look on there. I put a picture of the cover of those. Reflection is important because just like our learners, we need to identify where we need help, both as individuals and as teachers. And I think that's really key because as teachers, all of the time, we are saying to the children to do things that actually we don't do ourselves. And to be an outstanding teacher, and I hate that phrase, to be an excellent teacher, a great teacher, a successful teacher, you need to be able to reflect on your own practice. You've got to be able to think about what it is that you need to do to get better, where your weaknesses are and where your strengths are. You need to think about not only how you're doing, but how you learn and develop as well. So it's not just thinking about where your strengths are, but what you're going to do about them. And reflection is really key with that one. What I would say, though, my best piece of advice about being reflective, and this is something I didn't hear when I was training, and I know this to be true. I've ridden the storm for 7 years now. I know for a fact that teachers are the worst people in the world for being self-critical. We are always very hard on ourselves. It's just the nature of what we do. And actually, it's really important when you're reflecting on your own practice to be positive and constructive. I don't like the word negative with this. It's positive or constructive. Positive, you look at your strengths. You look at what you have done well, what you have achieved, what you've managed to do, what you've got the children to do, and what part you've played in that. The other side of that, we don't use the word negative with children, and you shouldn't with yourself either. It's constructive, okay? Don't come back with a comment that isn't positive unless you've got something to do to work on it. So have your positives and your strengths and have your constructives. It's easy to be pessimistic. It is very easy to be defeatist in our job, and it's easy to take things personally. I know many times over the 7 years that something's happened and I've taken it very personally. I've been very sensitive about it. It's easy to do that, so don't, okay? Be constructive as much as you can. Have that actions, okay? Have your highs and have your lows, but think about how to develop your lows, okay? Think about, okay, that lesson didn't quite go so well. I didn't quite meet that standard. How am I going to do it better next time? It's really easy to fall into that dip, but don't. All right, and it's easy for me to say with words as well. I've gone through the storm, but it's something that you can do. Oh, sorry. The other thing to think about is evidencing your reflection. Now, some of the big things I'm going to say at the beginning before we go through the standards is there are some key ways that you can reference every single standard, and there are some tools that you can have to help you, because reflection isn't always easy. And I know that when you get to the NQT year, to that evidence file at the end, or if you get to the end of your skit year and you're doing your learning journeys, or however it's referenced, it can be quite hard to think back. Now, you may be thinking, well, this is really useful, James, to be telling me this at the end of April. Obviously, if you're a skit student going on into your NQT year, you can use this next year. If you're an NQT, the reflection doesn't stop now. Okay, it really doesn't stop now. You'll be doing it next year. You'll keep moving on with it. So my tips for evidencing reflection, sort of very general tips, a lot of it goes on in our heads. It's key to reference this as a trainee, as an NQT. I know for me now, at the end of a lesson, if it's gone really well, I think about that and I go, great, that was a really good lesson. I know what went well. If I have a lesson and it's not quite gone there, or I'm pulling my hair out at the end because the children haven't quite met the LO that I've given them, then I will reflect on that in my head. For you guys as NQTs, as skit students, as trainees, as ITTs, as BAs, as PGCs, whatever, you need to be thinking about putting that down on paper. Now, the best ways to do that is to have annotation. So to annotate over your notes, that's the most common one. Your lecturers, your mentors, and everyone will tell you that. Sticky notes and notes, just put them on, okay? If you've done a lesson plan, you don't need to rewrite the lesson plan. You don't need to write a long evaluation unless that's what's asked of you. But also, use sticky notes. Just put a little note next to it. This point here didn't work quite as well. I would do this next time. You might be doing weekly evaluations if you're an NQT, or if you are working, as I say, as a skit or a trainee, a BA, PGCE. But also your continuing practice. And TS8 is the big one here, and we'll talk about that later. It's my favourite standard. It's the one that I love to get involved with. But a really big thing with TS8 is taking on and acting on feedback. It works with part 2 as well, that professional conduct. So when you're evidencing your reflection by doing that, you're actually ticking one of the standards and reflecting on one of your standards as well. It's one of those cycles. So in terms of referencing your reflection, use those sticky notes, use those bits of paper, use the scraps of paper, tuck them in your file, use photos, use statements from teachers that you've helped, photocopy bits of children's work, print out emails from parents, anything like that, put them in. I was talking to someone on Twitter earlier on today because they're collecting a brilliant bank of CPD that they're doing while they're away, their distance learning. And what they've done is they've got a column of what CPD they're doing, who the provider is, and then their reflection of it, what their next steps are going to be, what they've learned, what the impact is of it. Impact, a big word in education at the moment as part of the Ofsted framework. So really think about how you can do that, how you can reference your reflection and get it in there. Maybe I should make certificates for this, I don't know. So let's start with the thinking task. I just want for you to think about this one. We're going to start with positive. Again, if you want to share these, please do. You can put them in the live chat. You can put them on Twitter using hashtag Wednesday night webinar on this one. I just want you to think of a high point from your year so far. Now, obviously, for me, it's not my NQT year, but I can think of high points from the year so far. It's been a shorter year than normal. Obviously, none of us have been in class since March, but it might be something if you've been in for a day as part of the COVID outbreak that you've thought about. But just think of a high point from your year, and then think of why it was a high for you. All right, just think about, was it because of the success that the children made? Was it because of how you felt? Was it because of the class as a whole? Was it an individual child? Maybe it was a light bulb moment for one of them. Maybe it was something that wasn't to do with the children at all. Maybe it was a meeting that you could put input into. Maybe it was one of those moments where for the first time in your NQT year, you really felt that you'd landed and you felt empowered for the first time. But just think about why it was a high for you. And then think, it sounds like a headspace thing now, doesn't it? Then think of reflecting on how you shared that success. So when you've had that high point, what did you do with it? Well, was it one of those moments you kept to yourself? Was it one of those things that you thought, you know what, I've done this, and I'm really, really proud of myself and I'm impressed, but I'm going to keep it to myself. I'm a modest, humble person. I don't need to share it with others. I just want to keep it in. Did you share it with others? Did you tell friends or family? Did you tell us on the Twitter sphere? Did you tell your networks? Did you tell your colleagues in school? Did you share it with your children? Okay, just think about how you shared that success, because that's quite key as well. That's a crucial thing, to celebrating the successes you've had, not being too hard on yourself as a teacher. As part of reflection, it's really key to share them. You don't need to share everything. If it's something that's personal to you, if it's something that maybe you taught a lesson in your training year or a previous placement that didn't quite go right, and then when you got to your second or third placement or your NQT year and you're established more in the classroom, you did something. The internet is rubbish, unfortunately, in my place, and at the middle of the outbreak, there's not a lot I can do about it, which is so annoying. But let's keep going. So reflecting on what you did as a result, how it informed your practice. That is the key thing to reflection. It's great to celebrate those highs, but equally it's important to make sure we reflect on what you do as your result. Impact, as I said, is that big word at the moment. Impact, implementation, two of the big ones within the Ofsted framework. Think about what impact it had. And that is going to be the key to you succeeding in reflection in your NQT year and your skit year. What mentors, what assessors want to see is that you can come up with the impact. It's not just identifying your strengths and your areas to be constructive with, your areas to develop, It's thinking about the impact. It's looking at the thought process and what comes out as a result. All right, and that's really, really key. So when we go through the standards today, as I said, we're going to look in those in just a second because we're a course past now. We're going to think about each of the standards. I'm going to go through the key headlines from the DFE on what they've said in terms of what each standard means. I'm going to add a few things that I've thought about and reflected on over the years. And then we're going to look at both how you can reflect on them and what evidence you can have on those. Again, it's really important that we think about that. But think about the whole way through on impact. And if you're writing learning journeys, if you're doing your NQT file, remember the impact. By thinking about what you did, don't make it useless. Think about what you can do next to improve. I didn't actually have a student teacher in my class for 4 years. I was asked after my third, and I said, no, I don't want to have a student teacher yet because I didn't feel that I'd reflected enough. I didn't feel that I'd gained enough from my own practice to pass that on to somebody else. 7 years in, I've reflected on it enough. I've taught most things at least twice now that I have been able to reflect, think about what works. I've made mistakes and I've moved on by changing what I've done. Okay, changing what I've done, moved it on, and then I've seen the impact of that, and again I've reflected a second time. So when you're reflecting on reflections, you know you've been doing this for quite a while. 2 comments that have come in. Big thanks to Chris and to Lynn, who I both know watched last week and put some lovely stuff out there. So both of you, thank you very much for the support. It means a great deal to me. Chris is saying his reflection, his positive for the year, noticing the increase in children's engagement in his lessons through talk partners and feedback. Took a while to develop, but it got there. Chris, that's a lovely one, isn't it? When you put so much time and effort and you really commit to something, you put the buy-in for that, and it takes ages for the children to get involved with that one. But that's such a nice one there. And hopefully what you've thought about that, not only was it your high point, but you've put in there a little bit of reflection already. It took a while to develop, but you got there. You thought about the cycle. I'm sure you tried new strategies. I'm sure that you, developed maybe growth mindset to get involved with the engagement. You thought about possibly, who was sitting next to who, thinking about the dynamics of the class, scaffolding it with questions. That all would have been part of your reflection on how to improve it. That's a really good one. And then spot on there as well, a great history lesson that had the children really engaged and experiencing a wow moment. We love those, don't we? Mainly due to the improvements in modelling. And I think that's nice. You can see as a trainee teacher or as a new teacher, particularly when you're given that feedback from an observer, an assessor or a mentor, when you do something and you see the children light up in front of you, and children engagement is one of the best things, isn't it? It's one of those moments we become teachers. So I talk about light bulb moments. I know that there's many educationists out there that talk about light bulb moments. I love them. And I even tell my class, we have that in my class, in my classroom culture, we call them light bulb moments. So the children will even say to me, no, just had a light bulb. I love that. And those, you're right, are really valuable parts of teaching. So Lynn, that's a really nice one. And actually, again, you've reflected, possibly with help from an assessor, possibly just from your own practice, that you're modelling, you wanted to improve it, you wanted to up that, and it worked for you. The children engaged, they had a wow moment, they enjoyed the lesson, they were enthusiastic, and their learning benefited as an impact. And the impact of their children learning is the big one. Okay, and if you can get that as part of an evaluation, that is definitely something to consider. So lovely ones for both of you. Thank you very much for sharing those. Keep getting involved, as I've said, on the live chat or on the hashtag Wednesday night webinar on Twitter. I haven't got Instagram up, unfortunately, today, so it's just Twitter and live chat on here. So let's move on to evidencing the standards. So there's quite a few documents out there to help with this. I will fully admit I've got on the screen in front of me not only my notes, but also I have got 3 documents I've used. Warwickshire County Council have done an example of this, and I've taken a few of their ideas. But if you Google teacher standard, I've got Brighton and Hove Council, and one I found off of TES actually. TES, another great resource for that one. Regional support documents are available. So Warwickshire and Brighton and Hove, they've actually done one for their area. And as I said last week, if you're watching the Q&A, Surrey structured my NQT year. They had a full-on folder, so it might be there is something regional there for you as well. I also want to say there is no right answer with evidencing, so what I'm saying is just part of the jigsaw puzzle. Look at the other documents, talk to NQTs in your school, past NQTs in your school, think about what they did. I always have my folders, my BA folders, my NQT folders in my classroom, so when I have students and NQTs, they can always look at those. I would say to them, don't copy them, there's no point, but it's just a way of giving some ideas of what you can do. And I will apologise, but also use it as a little point, is that the fact that actually when I was training, we had slightly different standards. So the new teaching standards, I think, came out in 2014 from the Department for Education. When I was training, we had 33 of them. There weren't 8. The 33 were then condensed, and the new format is better. And I know that having worked with NQTs and SCIT students and BAs and PGCEs in the last 4 years, the new format is not always liked. They're quite vague. They're quite open, but actually I think that's quite nice. The old ones were very, very prescriptive. So Q10 was basically your planning. I think Q17 was behaviour. They're etched in my mind somewhere, but they were very, very specific. And I had to evidence all 33 of them. So it was really, really tough to pass all 33 of them by the end of your 3 years of training and your NQT year. You had to tick every single one. As a trainee teacher, the parent one was a nightmare to tick. So the new format is better. It's less prescriptive, and it gives you the chance to include more evidence. Evidence is important. The answer for that one is twofold, really. Why is it so important? It helps you to reflect, and it signposts your own progress. I will never talk down or patronise NQTs or student teachers, training teachers that I've had. But the truth of the matter is that it's really hard to reflect on your practice at the beginning. I found that because I didn't know what I was doing. I was reflecting, but I didn't have those models and those ideas and that structure in my head to work from. So evidencing and doing those learning journeys and those NQT folders will help you to signpost your own progress. The other big thing is it helps your assessors and your mentors. And you want to please those because they're going to be the ones who make the grades. And I know that for a lot of people at the moment, we've been in that up and down situation about grades and probations and passing and this, that, and the other because of the COVID-19 crisis. So all in all, the paperwork will help. It will signpost when you need it, but also it will signpost when other people need it, your assessors and mentors. How evidence looks is also up to you. Now, it could be it is up to personal choice. It's up to you and it's up to the other person who's going to be using it. So all the stakeholders in your paperwork. I know that when I did my final placement, I actually changed mine because originally I did the evidence chronologically, stupidly, and then I did it by standard, which made a lot more sense in the way that I had to do it back then. It could be learning journeys. You could be doing it by standards. There could be photos in there. There could be write-ups. You could have annotations, copies of evidence, copies of work, statements, evaluations, observation feedback, which always seems to be the forgotten one. That's the best place because if you've got a mentor or an assessor who's really good, they will try and reference every standard in your observation feedback so you can tick all your boxes. There will be some repetition because it's very rare that standards don't cross over. If you think about standard 1, which is having high expectations, 2, which is for progress, and 6, which is for assessment, as well as 5 for differentiation, all 4 of those are going to jam together. You need all of them to be an effective teacher. So there will be some crossovers. You can put a bit of evidence in more than one because everything helps. Every little helps, to quote Tesco's. This is the time you need that. So let's start with standard 1. If you've got pen and paper, hopefully in that last 15 minutes of me rambling, that will help for you. So standard 1 is to set high expectations while inspiring, motivating and challenging pupils. Now the DFE give a few markers in this one. They talk about the safe and stimulating environment. They talk about mutual respect, goals to challenge the children, positive attitudes and values and behaviours. All right, those are the key sort of buzzwords that come off the standard. For me personally, having reflected on that for the 7 years, I think what that boils down to is being a good role model. Okay, you're pushing your pupils to be a good person and you are modelling that behaviour, both academically and as a person, sort of pastorally as well. Okay, so you're thinking about how you're going to inspire them to be good people and to learn hard, to motivate them to be good people and to learn hard, and to challenge their behaviour, their thinking, and their learning. That's what standard 1 is all about. In terms of practice, think about, there's loads of things. And actually, the key thing here is the safety aspect, because you do get that later on in TS8 in part 2. But this is a really good one for health and safety. So if you're doing a PE lesson or a science lesson, and you've referenced on your plan about something health and safety, evidence it. I remember one of my SCIT students, once we did a lesson where we're dissecting prawns in our science lab back at school, and it was great, a really, really nice lesson. But the strength of her lesson, what she took out of that the most, is the fact that in her lesson plan, she wrote on there to think about the children that were allergic to shellfish. Now, that's one of the 14 big allergens. It's never occurred to me to think about that whatsoever. Doesn't make me a bad teacher, I hope. But yeah, she did. She put it on there, but that was evidence for TS1 straight away. Really, really good. And that has now sat on the planning ever since, and we've really thought about that. PE lessons. If you are doing a PE lesson, obviously as a student, you should never be doing that unsupervised. But think about the set out of the hall. Have you got mats too close? The children are going to hit into each other. Have you made sure they follow the policy? They've got shoes off, no earrings, no watches. Is their hair tied back in a lesson? All of those things, if you can reference that in your planning, really good for TS1. For the stimulating environment, thinking about your classroom, think about displays and resources. Is it set up in a conducive way to learning? Is it going to support learning? Is it pushing engagement? Okay, all of those things. Get some photographs in there. That was the best bit of my first year, my NQT year. I referenced my displays and I took a photo of every display all through that NQT year. And it was lovely. At the end of the year, I printed them all off and put them in my folder. It was nice to look back. Use those, displays, they go up on the wall. If you don't take a photo, they're gone. You're never going to get them again. So yeah, definitely evidence those. Think about differentiation. That does link to this as well, particularly within the wider curriculum. This isn't just about English and maths, and I know that some schools really focus on the core subjects. This is about RE and PSHE. You're setting your children up to be brilliant people. You're setting them up to be inspirational, but to have the right behavior, the right attitudes. Think about that. Think about maintaining stretch in RE and PSHE. If you've identified you've got a child in your class who is from any religion, get them to talk about it if they feel comfortable. Really push the whole respect towards other religions element. Think about the PSHE and how they can be good people. Think about the citizenship side. And of course, there'll be a lot of topical things with news. So, that's a really, really good way to think about it. For TS1, those are the main things, okay? Thinking about your high expectations academically, but also as a person. And because you've got so much to do with pushing children academically, I think really it's that making the whole child or developing the whole child that's important for TS1. Evidence it, as I said, with feedback. Observation feedback is a key one, lesson plans, and your own evaluations as well if you're doing those. Cool. TS2. Promote good progress and outcomes by pupils. I mean, that one sort of is what it says on the tin, really. The DFE say you need to be accountable for attainment, progress and outcomes, have an awareness of the children's capabilities and prior knowledge, guide pupils to reflect, which I think is hilarious considering we're looking at reflection and teaching is all about reflection, demonstrate knowledge of how pupils learn, that's a key one, and help them to take responsible attitudes to learning. What I boil that down to is guiding children to take ownership of their learning while monitoring their progress and outcomes yourself. It's almost being that critical friend that we'd expect a governor to be to a school. It's helping the children to be aware of their own learning and to realise that actually they've got to take responsibility for it as well. In the background, you're monitoring their progress and you're keeping really hot on that, but you're letting them run their education as well. You've got to take accountability and you've got to be proactive to help them with that journey. You're not going to succeed well in TS2 if you are a copious assessment taker behind the scenes, but you don't do anything with it. That's a really, really key one. So to think about what you can do to help with TS2, this is really the longitudinal one. So it's really good if you are a skit student, get the whole year in school. If you do a BA like I did, this was always a difficult one for us to reference because we're only in school for 8 weeks, 10 weeks at a time. We had to take a lot of the class teacher's baseline to begin with. Show that you're aware of tracking systems in school. Get to know the children. Get to know where they are at the beginning of a lesson. Get to know where they are at the end of a lesson. Get to know them over a unit. Get to know over a whole topic, over a term. Get involved in that parents' evening response where you say, how have they done, not just in English and maths, and again, it's easy to fall into that, easy to go with the core subjects, but think about them across the curriculum and really promote that. I know we talk about progress and outcomes in English and maths because they are the assessed ones, thinking about summative assessment, sorry. But really, really do think about how you can stretch them across the curriculum. So evidence for this one, think about the different learning styles, think about how you are able to get that progress, think about how you can reference it, think about how you can track it. This is one that very much as I said to you earlier on, mixes with TS5 for differentiation and 6 for assessment. Think about your assessment for learning strategies. How are you doing that in a lesson? How are you using the thumbs up, the hands up, the red, yellow, green, the give me a number between 1 and 10, scale how you're feeling at the beginning of the lesson, how you are at the end of the lesson. How are you using that to demonstrate progress across a lesson or a scheme or a unit or a term? Think about those. Think about referencing them. Think about the arrangement of the classroom. Are you setting children together? Are you using the Vygotsky strategies, the zone of proximal development, which I was using every single one of my assignments at university? Are you putting mixed ability children together? Are you setting them, inability groups? Are you completely doing it at random and seeing where they come? Are you doing assessments at the beginning and then changing halfway through the lesson based on that? Think about how you are scaffolding that progress and how you are signposting it across the lesson. It's also down to the relationships as well. And I think this is a key thing which is sort of hinted at all the way through the teacher standards, but we never really talk about. We say that if you've got a great relationship with your class, they trust you. But I don't think a lot of newer teachers realise what they mean, because we don't tell newer teachers what that means. But to have a good relationship with your class, it's not just to get on with them and they respect you and they're happy in class. It's that they have the trust that you understand what they need to learn. You know what they need to learn. You know how to support them. You know how to track that. You know where they are. You'll get that over time. But you just need to know that that's one of the really key things about having that good relationship with your class. So with TS2, think about your tracking, mix it in with the other standards, use children's books. If you've done a starter and then you've done a plenary that link together and that shows the progress, but any reference to how you're using that assessment for learning to track the progress at the beginning to the end of a lesson or a unit or a scheme or whatever, that's the key one for that. Only to promote good progress, but you are able to help your children to do that through their own learning. That's the key one. I think that's sort of a harder one to do as well, personally, but there we go. TS3, really nice one, actually, subject knowledge and curriculum knowledge. DFE say that you need to have secure subject knowledge in relevant areas to have an understanding of developments and subject areas, take responsibility for high standards in English, early reading using SSP or systematic synthetic phonics, and early maths. Okay, that's the big one for the DFE. Sorry, DFE for TS3. For me, it goes a little bit more than that, personally, from what I've reflected on over the years. And it's about being a learner too, knowing what the children need to learn, role modeling the passion to learn, and being curious. Okay, be confident in being an open teacher. Ask the children questions. Let the children ask you questions. Let the learning be led by them. Now that petrified me to begin with. I remember in my summer before my NQT year, I went away. I learned loads of things I need to learn. I learned about the Romans. I learned about the Aztecs, as it was back then. Learned about mountains. I went to Switzerland for the holiday to go and get some photos of mountains and everything. It was great. Got great subject knowledge. Used it in the classroom. But actually, more than that, it was developing my own self as a learner as well and encouraging the children to do that. You need to instill in them a love of learning new information, to be academic. You need to demonstrate that to them. And the best way to do that is to promote that love of learning in class, to be curious with the children. I love those lessons where I don't know. We will ask Google. We will, the best present I've ever had, we had a brand new teacher iPad a couple of months ago. It's brilliant. The lesson, if we don't know, I'll go to the teacher iPad. We'll have a look on it together. I'll put it up on the board. I admit when I don't know something. And that's just as much part of TS3 as knowing it ahead of time. Okay, you need to have the foundations, the lesson, the topic, the unit, so that you can answer the children's questions. But if the children want to extend that, let them. Work with them to do that. Demonstrate those skills, where to go to answer. And that growth mindset, say to them, it's okay that we didn't know that. It's okay, I didn't know that. We've learnt that one together. Obviously, what I'm not saying is turn up to your lesson without having looked at the lesson plan. Think about it beforehand. And as you get into the teaching, and when this is my 5th year in year 4, I'm teaching the same lessons and over again. If I don't look at it a week beforehand, then it's not the end of the world. But you need to have the basics for the lesson that you're teaching, but just know that you can instill into the children that love of finding out more, pushing the boundaries of the lesson plan, and you having the confidence and the curiosity to do that too. To reference that, annotate your lesson plans with questions that children have had. Do a task at the beginning of a starter, maybe, where you get the children, I've done this before, to write on a sticky note a question. You try and answer as many of them as you can at the end of the lesson. You can put them on a big board in your classroom and move them from one side to the other as you answer them over a lesson. Or I've done that for a unit as well, actually. For a topic unit, I had a big display board, got the children to write up a question, I think that was Romans. And then what I said to them is that once we've answered your question, at the end of a lesson, what I want you to do is I want you to go and get your sticky note, write down the answer to your question, stick it on the other side of the board. We're going to try and get them all from left to right across the unit. That's a really nice one for showing TS3, because it means that you can demonstrate the children's subject knowledge, but also for TS2, it shows their progress over time. It's another one of those crossover ones. Cool, right, TS4, the big one. Now, TS4 is the crucial part of being a teacher, really. It's to plan and teach well-structured lessons. So for the DFE, they say to impart knowledge. I love that one, imparting knowledge is what we do. Developing understanding, making effective use of lesson time, the good old nemesis of pace, which got me in every single one of my observations as a new teacher. Promote the love of learning and curiosity, to set homework and extracurricular enrichment, to reflect on effectiveness of lessons and approaches to teaching, and to contribute to the provision. So not just planning your lessons, but contributing maybe to medium-term plans and the look of the curriculum as a school. That's something that I think that the school I work at does very well. Once you're into your NQT +1 year, you get a subject, and we work on mapping that provision and that curriculum across the school. I think it's really important that all teachers have input into that, and even student teachers, you know, trainee teachers, you have brilliant ideas. You're getting that new knowledge that's going to help us as schools to get the very best out of our curriculum. So never be worried about putting that in and demonstrating that as part of TS4. For me, as I've said, I think TS4 is the crucial part of being a teacher. It's about teaching effectively, but also in an engaging way. And I think that's where the promotion of love for learning and curiosity comes in. The other thing, and I think this is really key, and it's not mentioned in there, is that it's realizing the value of what you do and what part you play in the children's learning. As a new teacher and as an NQT, it's really easy to think that you're just going to stand at the front of a class and you're going to talk and teach. That's not what we do, okay? You need to think about the strategies that you're using in a lesson. You know, are you using the learning styles? Are you doing visual, auditory, kinesthetic stuff? Are you putting enough time for the elements of the lesson that you really need to drive home? Is your starter engaging, and does it warm up their brains? Is the plenary consolidating something? Is it something completely different? Is it something that's sort of keeping something ticking over until you next cover it? Just having an idea of what part you play, what part your planning plays, your teaching plays, your delivery plays, all of that in the children's learning. That's the key thing for TS4. And reflecting on your pedagogy, doing things like this, you know, really thinking about, you know, I taught that lesson. I thought that lesson was good. The children made good progress. I think it would have been better if I'd have just kept them on the carpet for 2 minutes longer, or I'd let the children who knew earlier on what to do, I let them go, and I kept the others back with me, and I just stretched those a little bit further. And then maybe when the children who knew at the beginning came back, I could have pushed them on. Just thinking about how you're going to structure those lessons and use that time. Best way to evidence this one, your lessons to demonstrate pace, to have effective lessons with plenary starters, make use of every part of your lesson. Think about questioning to really reference this. If you want to show the evidence of this, really think about, good question, and I'll come back to that one. If you want to think about questions, say to the children, did they enjoy a lesson? What did you learn from today's lesson? What was your favourite part of today's lesson? That's really good evidence. That helps you to reflect as well. You know, if you have a brilliant starter, or you think it's a brilliant starter and it goes on for 20 minutes, but all of the children love getting down to the main task, but they ran out of time on the main task, was the starter as effective for them as it could have been? So really think about asking the children for that one. They can be our harshest critics alongside ourselves, but they're very truthful and they will really help you to reflect. And their input into your final evidence will also be very, very good. As an assessor and as a mentor, I want to see what the children think as well. When I'm observing children, when I'm observing a trainee teacher, I will get up and ask children what their favourite part of the lesson has been. I will get up and ask them what they're doing right now, and why they're doing it. Things like that. It's not for me trying to trick my trainee out, but I put it in the observation feedback because it then means that they can use that as evidence for later on in the story. Yeah, it's a really good one. Lynn, with homework on that one, homework's a tricky one on that because obviously we don't set homework in EYFS or Key Stage 1. Oh, computer's just flipped. In Key Stage 1 as well in some placements. So it's not always crucial. And I think with teaching standards, when you're passing them off and you are getting that sign off at the end of the year, it's a rule of best fit. And in fact, I know your provider, so I know there is an element of rule of best fit there. I think what's very important with homework is that although you may have homework set and you're saying that your placement sets it as a year group, so individual teachers have little control over it, we do the same. What it could be that you do with that one is you set your children that question. If you're thinking about a progression of lessons, the next lesson we're going to be doing this, I'm going to set you a question. That's going to be your starter for the next lesson. Think about, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. So so if I'm teaching the Romans and I say, right, next week we're going to do the successful invasion of Britain. I want you to go away. I want you to find out when it happened, who was the general, the emperor, and why it went well. Find me one reason why the invasion worked, or one fact about the invasion. Your next lesson starter is then going to be a cloud of that. You're going to give each child a sticky note. They're going to write their fact on. You're going to stick it up on a board. Take a photograph of that, and that hits your homework target because you've given them something to do at home. That's still extracurricular provision. It doesn't have to be a sheet on there, but just something extra to support their learning. And if you can evidence it, even better. Okay, I would say that's the way to put that one in. And again, it looks great. If you do that from an observed lesson, and your starter in your observed lesson is, right, okay. So last week, as an extra, I asked you to go and find this, and then 30 children in your house, in your class, get involved with that and are really enthusiastic to share their facts. What a great way to prove that you are thinking about teaching well-structured lessons, getting their homework in there, supporting the curiosity, and getting them to work from home. I think it's such a lovely way to do that. So that would be my advice, Lynn. If homework is prescribed and you're involved in that, even if it's set as a year group, you're still part of that decision-making. Little things like that just will help you reference it more. Hopefully that's helpful. If you want to add anything more to it, pop it in the live chat, but thank you for that one, Lynn. Okay, I realise that I'm whittling on this evening, so I'm going to try and cut the other one short. TS5, adapting teaching to respond to strengths and needs of pupils. This is differentiation, not just special needs. And lots of people fall into that trap that SEND is the be-all and end-all of Standard 5. It's not at all. Differentiate appropriately, yes. Understand factors that inhibit your pupils. Demonstrate an awareness of barriers, clear understanding of pupils' needs. Think about language needs, emotional, physical, and mental. That's what the national curriculum said. And for me, it's all about knowing your children, how to get the best out of them. Be aware of their barriers, but don't see them as barriers. Don't let that stop you from giving them the opportunity to learn. Don't put that glass ceiling on them. That's one of the big ones. If you go to educational talks and inset days, that's always the one about the fleas in the glass. You've got fleas in the glass, they can jump a huge amount. Put the card on top of the glass, and they'll only jump to the top of the glass. Even when you take the card off, you put the glass ceilings on the children. Don't think about them as barriers or excuses. Think about how to support them, scaffold them, and stretch them. So not only to get to where their barrier is, if you think of it as a barrier, but to scaffold around it and then stretch them further past it as well. All children have got the potential to move past their barriers. They just need the right tools to help them. I would also say with that one, so it's not SEND only. It's also not only your less able children, it's also your more able children and your middlies. Don't forget about the middle ability, the core of your class. For all of these, you need to be responding to the strengths and needs of all of your pupils. It also annoys me when we use those labels of less, more, and middle ability, because that doesn't apply to everything. When you have, and I'm really glad we don't stream for maths in the school I'm in now, we used to. But I used to find that in my set of children for maths, although they had gained the same test score, they all had their own strengths. You'd have some that were brilliant at time, some of them were brilliant at shape, space, and measure, which was my utter downfall when I was at school, because I'm not a visual learner whatsoever. So, you've got all these different strengths. So don't just think of it as their barriers and their SEND, because actually, we can always get them past their barriers, and we can always scaffold them and support them with SEND. But think about the whole spectrum of people, the most able, the gifted and talented, and those core children who often miss out. To evidence that one, differentiation in your plans, really, really easy, to be fair. Think about your guided groups, think about which groups you're going to be working with, make sure you mix them up. Questioning in the classroom is really good, tailoring your questions. There is a bit like Bloom's taxonomy, is a taxonomy of questioning, a level of questioning. If you have a less able child, you can start with the questions of what is this? You can then move on to how do we know this? And then you can keep moving it up. Where can we find the information to find this? What are your opinions on this? Why doesn't this work? Why do you not think this? Thinking about that balanced argument element. Use your questioning, differentiate it in a lesson to help those children. And I think we naturally do that anyway. When you've got that good understanding of the children, the questions to ask the children to play to their strengths and to give them successes in the class and to give them that progress that they deserve. But referencing it through targeted questioning is really, really good. Also think about school systems and policies to support pupils, have a chat with the SENCO, use wave 1, 2 and 3 interventions, all of those things that can be used to do that one. And CPD is a good one for this as well. If you have got evidence of doing CPD for all of those things, put it in. So a couple of years ago in our school, one of our inset days, we had to do an online CPD training for dyslexia, autism, and ADHD. So we did 3 of them. They're each 2-hour courses, did it over a day, but that could then go into an NQT file, particularly if you then do an impact statement with it as well. You think about what it is that training is going to do to help your practice. Remember, that's always the key thing with reflection, not only reflecting on what went well and what you could improve, but also thinking about what you then are going to do next time, and even bringing that back next time in your evaluation for your next lesson or next session. TS6. Now, it might have been Lynn, actually, I can't remember. Somebody asked me to just focus on TS6 a little bit. I think it was Lynn, yeah. To make accurate and productive use of assessment. Now, this is a key one, so I'm going to talk on this one for a couple of minutes. The DFEs say that you need to know the forms of assessment and their relevance, including statutory assessments. We're talking Year 1 phonics screening, Year 2 SATs, Year 4 multiplication times table checks, Year 6 SATs, and then, of course, up into Key Stage 3, 4 and 5 with A-levels, GCSEs and the such. Also, it's to use assessment to secure progress, linking to TS2, data to monitor and plan, to give regular feedback and to encourage response to marking. So that's what the DFE say for that one. My own take on TS6 is assessing your pupils effectively. Obviously, that makes sense, following school and government policies, but also to make reflection and assessment useful and to help the children to see it as part of their journey. Now, this is the big thing with effective assessment. And I think that if you want to do really, really well in your grading for NQT or whatever, then really an accurate use of assessment is key. Yes, you need to be able to monitor the children, know what the assessment's telling you, know where the gaps are to push later, to look at how you can use your tracking to see what gaps you've got in the knowledge. But it's about the productive use of assessment that I think is key. So let's talk you through this very quickly. Formative assessment, of course, is the day-to-day assessment for learning. Summative assessment is what you would have at the end of the unit. Now, depending on how you use that, it is how it's going to be productive and accurate for you. So if you're doing a modular test, for example, an audit at the end to see where they've gone, you can see the questions that the children have missed. You can see where you're teaching. You can go back where those gaps are and where you can pick up again later on and just make sure, a bit of consolidation to make sure they've got it. Now, that I would say is an accurate use of assessment because you're using the data that's come from the children, but you're being productive with it as well. You're making use of it, you're being proactive and filling in that gap later. So for summative assessments, that's a really key thing. And obviously part of that is the Year 2 SATs, the Year 6 SATs and all of those elements. Working towards those boundaries, working towards those milestones, if you like, are really, really key. But actually the practice of them is just as important. So within that summative assessment, think about practice papers, think about end of unit tests, end of term tests, things like that. Think about what the data is telling you in terms of if your child is working towards, if they are meeting, if they are exceeding, whatever the terminology is that you've got around that. But also think about why. Think about where their full potential is. Think about where their gaps are. If you're doing a maths paper, are they getting all the shape questions wrong? Are they getting the data questions wrong? If it's English, are they struggling with reading, writing, EGPS? Is it spelling, particularly? The EGPS papers for Key Stage 2, you get all of the grammar side of things, and then you get the spelling side of things. Well, if you've got a child who's dyslexic, the spelling side is going to be really hard for them. So is it that we need to think about TS5 and TS6 together? You think about the spelling score being low, you know they're dyslexic, you put the intervention into place. That is how you can make that accurate and productive use of the assessment. So I would say in order to really to do that one, make sure that you're thinking about marking, which of course comes in with the whole TS6 thing. Make sure your marking is effective, it's valuable. Make sure it's not above and beyond if it's not being used to help the children's progress. That's a key one. To show that you can use formative and summative assessment during the lesson. Assessment for learning questions. It doesn't all have to be written down, it could be verbal. You can get the children to jot something in their book. But think about those assessment strategies within a lesson. Make appropriate use of an assessment file, spreadsheets or whatever. Don't just put their times table scores onto a spreadsheet. Look at them, look at the trends. Is there a child who is underperforming? Is there a child who's very up and down? Is there a child that when you get to a certain times table drops, but the rest of them they're getting? Are they struggling with their 6s, but they can do their 3s? Have they not made the link that they double one to get to the other? It's just about not seeing the child as a number and as a data set, and really putting it into them as a person and evidencing that you have done that. Okay, so think about what you can get in the books, think about what you can put into your planning. Again, think about the differentiation that comes from that, and think about that cycle: planning, teaching, marking, evaluating, and just keeping those 4 things going around. That would be my main thing for TS6. The last 3 then, so TS7, behaviour. Behaviour management is always the big one, and I am going to do a behaviour webinar in 2 weeks' time. It will be, I have no idea what the date of that is off the top of my head, but 2 weeks' time we're going to have a look at a whole hour of behaviour management strategies, and I'm tempted to do that one as a Zoom webinar so that we can all be a little bit more interactive. So keep your eyes out for that one. We'll see what we can do. The DFE say there's clear rules in the classroom, responsibility for the children's behaviour, to have high expectations, a range of strategies to manage the class effectively and to maintain a good relationship with the class with appropriateness. And I love the fact they talk about the the appropriate relationship that you have with the children. For me, I think this is the hard standard. It's balancing a constructive and positive relationship with your class, rooted with that respect and trust, but you've got to be authoritative and adaptable at the same time. When we're talking about an appropriate relationship with your class, it's not trying to be their friends. And I'll be honest, I've seen many people make that mistake over the years. They want to be really friendly with them at the beginning because they want the children on side. Don't do the whole thing of not smiling before Christmas, because that is absolute rubbish. I'm very anti that. But you just need to make sure that you are setting those really clear boundaries. You're following those boundaries. If you give a child a consequence or a warning, you stick with them. Use the school policies as backup. If you don't feel confident with that one, ask what your school policy is, speak to a more experienced teacher and say to them, look, what do you do? We've got a really nice policy in our school. It's a traffic light system. Everybody knows how to use it. Our TAs use it, our LSAs, our sports coaches, our dinner staff, everybody uses it. So we all are on the same system. And it means that we've all got that confidence to work on TS7 and to put that behaviour into place. So to reference it, I would say the big one here actually is evidence from your observations. If you've got strong behaviour for learning, and that is a comment in your observations, brilliant. Okay, even better if your assessor or your mentor is putting in how you are doing that, if they're talking about the structures that you have put into place, the school policies that you are following. That's a really key way to do it. Think about rewards, think about sanctions. Again, make sure they are appropriate, make sure they reflect the work that children are doing. Don't go above and beyond. Remember that you can tweak it as well. So if you've got a child who really struggles with things, but there is that tiny victory, that light bulb moment that Lynn was talking about earlier on, that wow moment in a lesson that maybe one child gets, maybe that's an opportunity to give them a reward. It may not follow the school policy may not be enough for what the school policy says, but for them, that is a personal victory. Chris said earlier on, engaging the children, the increase of engagement through talk partners and feedback. Again, what he might have used there to develop that is using the behaviour management strategies, to really think about how to reward that. Was there a good couple that could stand up and show their work? Are there opportunities to record and to play back? All of those things, but to reward children more so than sanction them are really, really strong, and a good way to reflect on those. Also think about your resources as well. Think about marking, because it may be that marking does that, and evidence that the pupil and children know about the ground rules. It's as simple as that. In an observation, if I see a child who's messing around, it's different for me because I'm a class teacher. But if I put up a child and I say that, you shouldn't be doing that in this lesson while the teacher's teaching, the fact that they know that, and they then have the respect for that student teacher to go back into line, that tells me that that's being put in there. And same with NQTs. And then TS8, wider professional responsibilities. Now, this is my favourite one because this is the one that I love doing, because teaching is not just about teaching. It's not just that bit in the classroom. It's making the positive contribution to the wider life and ethos of the school. For me, it's everything outside the classroom that actually makes a teacher. It's the odds and ends standard because it is lots and lots of different areas, but it's vital stuff. It's the above and beyond, it's the extra mile, and it's the non-teaching side of teaching, okay? But it's the one that actually, I think, for me, improves my job. I love teaching, I love being in the classroom with the children, but I love everything else about the wider school. That's why I've had so many hats on over the 7 years I've been there, because I like to get stuck in with things. It's what makes the job interesting. So for you, as newer teachers or student teachers, it's about making contributions, having that bravery to make the contribution in the staff meeting, running a lunchtime club or an after school activity, making suggestions for opportunities for the children, possibly, making suggestions for homework, for extra learning, being proactive, seeking advice and support and taking it on board. Your feedback from observations is a really big one for TS8. Engaging with your CPD, once again, you're doing it right now by doing what you're doing now. Sitting at home, watching some CPD and going above and beyond to think about how to develop yourself as a teacher and to have that impact on children. The big one as well, teaching assistants and parents in the classroom, all of those support staff that you've got. Now, obviously not every school has that, so it's becoming harder and harder to do that. But if you have support staff, deploy them well. Think about how they can be effective. Can they be scribing for you in the starter or the input? Which group would you like them to work with? Have you asked them which group they want to work with? Which one do you think it'd be better playing to their strengths? If you are writing, well, obviously when you're doing lesson plans, not if you're writing, when you're writing lesson plans, reference in there who they're going to work with, give them a group. Share the lesson plans with them before time, not just a quick chat a minute or two before the lesson. We, in our school, send weekly plans for them the Friday before, so they know what's coming up that week. Being really proactive with that. And of course, talking to parents and carers effectively. Now, the big relationship between them is a difficult one, and I'm going to touch on that in the behaviour webinar in a couple of weeks' time. Parents petrified me to begin with, and even now there are still some scary ones 7 years on. As younger teachers as well, that can be something that's quite daunting. But for TS8, you need to have that good relationship with the parents. It's important that you do that. Parent emails are a nice one to show that as well. Emails from members of staff who appreciate what you've done. All of those things are useful evidence for TS8. So those are the main TS standards, the majority of them, the 8 ones. I'm going to touch on personal and professional conduct as well very quickly. The part 2, it does what it says on the tin really. It's all those key things like safeguarding, dignity and respect for the children, British values, not expressing your own personal beliefs, following school policies and ethoses, a knowledge of statutory frameworks and duties, and being a role model. Now, I'm not skirting over that because I don't think it's important, because it's very important, particularly the safeguarding thing. I can't say that enough. But part 2 is, it's always the harder one for mentors to understand and to put in, but also it's tricky because there's not a great deal to do to reference it. It's part of your practice really. It's all quite verbal, treating the children with dignity and respect. The safeguarding, you can print off your CPD certificates. you know, you can reference your British values in your lesson plans, but it's all pretty much lesson plans or day-to-day stuff that others may not get to see. So for that one, it tends to come from observation feedback. It tends to come on your end of year and term reports. But it is very, very key. So make sure you follow that one. And as I said, really, that one is what it does on what it says on the tin for part 2. Cool. So that is it. I have slightly overrun tonight. I do apologise. That is it for this week's webinar, though. Next Wednesday, we're going to be looking at finding yourself as a teacher. Now, that may sound a little bit mindfulness and Zen. We are going to be looking at your identity as a teacher. This is something I did right back at the beginning. I thought about what mattered to me. I had my teacher mantra, my teacher motto. I thought about really what was going to be a priority for me on this one. So if you want to get involved next week, the Wednesday night webinar again, 7 o'clock. It's all about finding your identity. I'm going to try and put some stuff up during the week to help you with that. And again, it might be useful for you to have pen and paper with you and to either have Twitter open or to have the live chat open as well, because we're going to do some interactive stuff backwards and forwards on that one, which should be quite nice. To look at the principles, the values of teaching, how to ascertain your own priorities, but also how to strengthen your practice and your resilience. In the meantime, always, if you want to get involved, you can Twitter at lifeofanNQT, email me at lifeofanNQT@gmail.com. You can find a blog, which has now got the videos on them. I finally put them up, lifeofanNQT and beyond.wordpress.com. Lots of stuff they were teaching, but lots of stuff for life away from teaching as well, work-life balance, and Instagram of Life of NQT. Thanks for your company this evening. It's lovely to see those of you that have come back. I'll be back next Wednesday. Thanks very much for Lynn and Chris for getting involved in the live chat. But yeah, I will let you go and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday evenings and your week. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next Wednesday.